It's April. Or maybe it isn't. But every year, people come back to this anime because something about this month just makes it hit even harder. There's a reason it's called Your Lie in April, and once you see it, you don't forget it. And it starts with a prodigy who lost the ability to hear his own music. This is the story of Kousei Arima, a piano prodigy, a kid who could sit at a bench and play a piece so precisely, so mechanically perfect, that audiences would call him a human metronome. Not a compliment.
His mother, sick, desperate, running out of time, drilled that perfectionism into him from the moment his hands were big enough to reach the keys. Every wrong note had a consequence. Every deviation from the sheet music was failure. She wasn't teaching him to love music. She was teaching him to survive. And then she died. And Kousei couldn't hear the piano anymore. Not metaphorically, literally. The moment he sat down to play, silence. His own notes disappeared, like his mind had built a wall between him and the one thing that defined his entire childhood and refused to let him back in. So he walked away, packed it all in. And for years, he floated through middle school like a ghost, quiet, hollow, present in body, absent in everything else. That's where we find him. But here's where it changes. His childhood friend, Tsubaki, pulls him along one afternoon. Nothing serious, just a small local performance, the kind you don't expect to remember. And then Kaori Miyazono walks out onto the stage. She's a violinist, and from the second she starts playing, something feels different. She's not strictly following the sheet music. She bends it, stretches it, turns something rigid into something alive. The judges aren't impressed. They want precision, control. But the audience, they're leaning forward. And Kousei can't look away. Because for the first time, music doesn't feel like something he lost. It feels like something calling him back. Kaori is everything his mother told him music wasn't allowed to be. Loud, imperfect, overflowing. She plays like every note actually matters, like she's trying to say something, even if no one else understands it yet. She also, for reasons that won't make sense until the very end, decides that Kousei is going to be her accompanist. He doesn't get a vote. What follows is not a love story in the traditional sense. It's messier than that. Kaori has feelings she never says out loud. Kousei is still barely functional. His childhood friend, Tsubaki, is watching from the sideline with emotions she can't quite name either. And somewhere underneath it all, something feels off. Not obvious, just small things. A missed performance, a sudden absence, moments where her energy drops just for a second before she forces it back. The show doesn't spell it out. It just lets you sit with that feeling that something isn't quite right. And the longer it goes on, the harder it is to ignore. The performances in this show are where it earns everything. You don't need to know a thing about classical music. You don't need to recognize the pieces or understand what makes one interpretation different from another, because the show doesn't explain it to you technically. It just shows you what music feels like when it comes from a real place. Kousei's first competition performance back is painful to watch. You can see him crumbling in real time, notes disappearing, hands freezing, the audience whispering, and then something breaks through. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but something honest finally breaks through, and for the first time, his playing stops sounding like a machine and starts sounding like a person. That moment is the show's entire soul caught in a single frame. The visuals make sure you feel every bit of it. Your Lie in April is beautiful in a way that feels almost unfair. Cherry blossoms fall at exactly the right moments. Color drains from scenes when Kousei's world collapses and floods back when Kaori pulls him forward. The animation during performances doesn't just show fingers on keys. It shows emotions taking physical form, spiraling outward, reaching into the audience. It's the kind of show that makes you forget you're watching anime. You're just there. And then we reach the end. From here on, full spoilers. So if you haven't seen it yet, this is your moment. Kousei's final performance happens while Kaori is in surgery. He knows the odds. The show has been honest enough with you by this point that you know them too, and he plays anyway. For her, one last time, together, in the only way still possible. There's a sequence during this performance where Kousei isn't alone on stage anymore. In his mind, Kaori is right there beside him. It's a duet that never actually happened, a final, beautiful moment where their music finally becomes one. Even though she's miles away in a hospital bed, for these few minutes, they're together in a world made of color and sound. It's his way of saying goodbye, and it destroys you. And then comes the letter. Kaori wrote it knowing she wasn't going to make it, and in it, she explains everything. Why she chose the violin, why she acted the way she did, why she spent so much of her time, her limited time, pulling a broken boy back toward the light, and most importantly, the lie she built everything around. She confesses, and she apologizes, and she signs off the way she lived, fully, completely, without holding anything back. By the end of that letter, Kousei isn't the only one crying. Here's what I think people miss about this show. It's not really about grief. It's not really about music, even. It's about what happens when someone chooses to matter to you, fully, inconveniently, completely, and then is gone. Kaori didn't save Kousei by fixing him. She saved him by refusing to let his pain be the most important thing in the room. She was louder than his trauma, more stubborn than his silence, and she stayed in that role knowing she was running out of time to do it. That's not a simple love story. It's something more complicated than that. And here's why it hits different in April. April is the month of cherry blossoms in Japan. Beautiful, fleeting, famous specifically for how quickly they fall. The Japanese have a whole philosophy around it, the idea that something can be more beautiful because it doesn't last. That impermanence isn't a flaw, it's the point. Kaori is a cherry blossom. She came into Kousei's life in April. She changed everything, and maybe that's why her time there feels so fragile. But the lie she built, the one the whole title is built around, wasn't a cruel lie. It was a protective one, a loving one. One last performance, played not for an audience, but for the one person she needed to reach. And it worked. That's your lie in April. It's not perfect. Sometimes it drags. Sometimes the dialogue feels a little too written, like the author speaking through the characters. But when it works, it really works. Because this isn't just a story about music, or grief, or even love. It's about being changed by someone in a way that doesn't go away, even after they do. And maybe that's why people come back to it every single April. Not to relive the pain, but to remember what it felt like to be found.